wrote the first checks. I disagree with that. I said these companies need to go through a managed bankruptcy, and in that process, they can get government help and government guarantees, but they need to go through bankruptcy to get rid of excess cost and the debt burden that they'd built up. And fortunately,
Governor Romney,
the president
that's
took
not what you said.
Fortunately, you can take a look at the op-ed.
Governor Romney, you did not say that you would provide governor help.
I said that we would provide guarantees, and that was what was able to allow these companies to go through bankruptcy, to come out of bankruptcy. Under no circumstances would I do anything other than to help this industry get on its feet. And the idea that has been suggested that I would liquidate the industry, of course not. Of course not.
Let's check the record.
That's the height of silliness. I have never said I would liquidate the industry.
Governor,
I want to keep the industry going and thriving. And that's why I have the kind of commitment to make sure that our industries in this country can compete and be successful. We in this country can compete successfully with anyone in the world, and we're going to. We're going to have a president, however, that doesn't think that somehow the government investing in car companies like Tesla and Fisker, making electric battery cars. This is not research, Mr. President. These are the government investing in companies, investing in Solyndra. This is a company. This isn't basic research. I want to invest in research. Research is great. Providing funding to universities and think tanks, great. But investing in companies, absolutely not.
Governor,
that's the wrong way to go. I'm still speaking. Well, so I want to make sure that we make America more competitive, and that we do those things that make America the most attractive place in the world for entrepreneurs, innovators, businesses to grow. But your investing in companies doesn't do that. In fact, it makes it less likely for them to come here, Governor, because the private sector is not going to invest in a solar company.
I'm happy to respond.
If you're investing government money in someone else's.
Look, I think anybody out there can check the record. Governor Romney, you keep on trying to airbrush history here. You were very clear that you would not provide government assistance to the U.S. auto companies even if they went through bankruptcy. You said that they could get it in the private marketplace. That wasn't true. They would have gone through a liquid.
You're wrong, Mr. President.
No, I am not wrong. I am not wrong.
People can look it up. You're right.
People will look it up.
Good.
But more importantly, it is true that in order for us to be competitive, we're going to have to make some smart choices right now. Cutting our education budget, that's not a smart choice. That will not help us compete with China. Cutting our investments in research and technology, that's not a smart choice. That will not help us compete with China. Bringing down our deficit by adding $7 trillion of tax cuts and military spending that our military is not asking for, before we even get to the debt that we currently have, that is not going to make us more competitive. Those are the kinds of choices that the American people face right now. Having a tax code that rewards companies that are shipping jobs overseas instead of companies that are investing here in the United States, that will not make us more competitive. And the one thing that I'm absolutely clear about is that after a decade in which we saw drift, jobs being shipped overseas, nobody championing American workers and American businesses, we've now begun to make some real progress. What we can't do is go back to the same policies that got us into such difficulty in the first place. And that's why we have to move forward and not go back.
I could agree more about going forward, but I certainly don't want to go back to the policies of the last 4 years. The policies of the last 4 years have seen incomes in America decline every year for middle-income families, now down $4,300 during your term. 23 million Americans still struggling to find a good job. When you came to office, 32 million people on food stamps. Today, 47 million people on food stamps. When you came to office, just over $10 trillion in debt. Now, $16 trillion in debt. It hasn't worked. You said by now we'd be at 5.4% unemployment. We're 9 million jobs short of that. I've met some of those people. I've met them in Appleton, Wisconsin. I met a young woman in Philadelphia who's coming out of college, can't find work. Ann was with someone just the other day that was just weeping about not being able to get work. It's just a tragedy in a nation so prosperous as ours that these last 4 years have been so hard. And that's why it's so critical that we make America once again the most attractive place in the world to start businesses, to build jobs, to grow the economy. And that's not going to happen by just hiring teachers. Look, I love teachers, and I'm happy to have states and communities that want to hire teachers do that. By the way, I don't like to have the federal government start pushing its way deeper and deeper into our schools. Let the states and localities do that. I was a governor. The federal government didn't hire our teachers. But I love teachers.
This will be the last question before the final statements here in San Rafael, California. And just for our live audience here, I guess you should know that the Giants are winning 9-0 in the ninth, 2 outs, going to the World Series. But that's not what's important here. I wanted to turn to Jill Stein, answering the question that was put to Governor Romney. If you declare China a currency manipulator on the first day, aren't you going to start a trade war?
Yeah. You know, it's important to recognize that things are not as simple as they are trying to frame them here. In fact, the United States, by undertaking these quantitative easings, is effectively manipulating our currency as well, and is effectively devaluing our currency. So in fact, we're not so different from China here after all. And I think that's a point that bears making here, because the presumption is that you got China over here and you got the United States over here, and that the things that we're trading represent real ownership in the countries where the names are attached. But in fact, U.S. companies are now so invested, have so many subsidiaries and partners in China, that in fact half of our imports coming from China are actually based out of U.S. partnerships and subsidiaries. So it's not quite so simple. And in many ways, the struggles of the Chinese people aren't so terribly different. They're different in magnitude, but they're very similar in value and in quality to the struggles of the American people here. The Chinese people are likewise struggling to have real unions that are recognized. They're struggling to raise their wages, which are now somewhere, you know, at the unthinkable level of 30 or 50 cents an hour. They are struggling to raise their wages. They are struggling to protect their environment. The same thing that our workers and Americans are struggling for here, to have decent working conditions and security and good wages for our workers, and to protect our environment. So, you know, in many ways, this is a struggle against a multinational corporate elite, which is as powerful in China as it is here in the United States. So to simply frame this as U.S. versus China is really not the wrong way to approach it. And we don't want to go at this undermining a relationship with China. We want to be able to build a relationship with China, strengthening human rights and workers' rights and environmental protections. What Barack Obama is doing is enabling what Mitt Romney is doing. Mitt Romney is moving jobs to China. We know that right now. Sensata Corporation in Freeport, Illinois, is looking at the loss of all of their jobs. Bain Capital, started by and still invested in by Mitt Romney, is moving these jobs. Even though their profits are skyrocketing, they are moving to China. They are losing their jobs. Bain Capital and Mitt Romney's investments are sending jobs to China right now. But in fact, Barack Obama is negotiating a trade agreement right now that will continue to offshore our jobs and undermine our wages, and in fact undermine American security and sovereignty as well. This is through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is being negotiated behind closed doors by 600 corporate representatives, that is effectively NAFTA on steroids. We need a fair trade agreement, not a free trade agreement, and we need to go back and renegotiate not only NAFTA, but the other free trade agreements that Barack Obama has brought us under his watch. We need to get to free trade, which is fair not just free for corporations and expensive and devastating for people and the environment and workers. We need truly fair trade agreements, and we need a relationship with China where we can partner with them to basically work with the expertise that they have. They have enormous expertise right now in solar energy, in wind energy, in clean manufacturing. We need to work with them so that we are bringing a Green New Deal, not just here at home to the United States, but that we're working with China to develop a global Green New Deal as well, and to spearhead an effort to revive the international climate accord that were basically ended until 2020 by Barack Obama.
Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party.
Because of our federal government's policies for years, and it started, at least it was at its worst during the Clinton administration, and it keeps coming. Every year, more trade agreements. We started with NAFTA. We saw American workers getting shafted while multinational corporations benefited. And then you see the kinds of conditions that foreign workers are living under. There was a CEO of a company in my hometown who told me they were buying products from China. So they went over there to see what was going on in the factory. They found that toxic fumes were being emitted during the manufacturing process with no ventilation, and Chinese workers sleeping on cots in the factory and not allowed to leave. This is the kind of inhumane treatment of foreign workers that our federal government, through these trade agreements, are helping to foster. It has got to come to an end. Millions of jobs have been lost, not only to China, but to so many other nations. And we've got people, you know, Barack Obama talks about his great recovery since 2008. 60% of the jobs that were lost were mid-level, mid-skill, mid-paying jobs, and only 22% of the new jobs during the so-called recovery are of that category. Most of the new jobs that he brags about are low-level, low-skill, low-paying jobs, as with the food sector or retail sales. And this is going to have horrendous long-term impacts. What we need to do is put employers on the same playing field, a level playing field. Those employers who are employing those in other countries need to observe the same kinds of rights for workers, and also the kinds of environmental protections that employers in the United States have to comply with. And we need to get back to the basics again. If we had a decent single-payer Medicare for all system in this country, our employers seeking to hire United States workers would be far more competitive, and everyone would benefit dramatically. Now, as to the path toward regaining, not retaining, because we've lost our competitive advantage with respect to most of the rest of the developed world and even the developing world, but the path to getting back on track, to regaining our competitive edge, is to put people to work, get good job training. We can put in place a WPA-like project where millions of people are employed, and we're investing in the future by rebuilding our nation's rapidly deteriorating infrastructure, and we need to ramp it up in terms of our education, provide a free or at least highly affordable higher education where we finally meet the goal of equal educational opportunities for everyone.
Let's go back to debate moderator.